Tired of searching for podcasts? Try Storio, the only app you need to discover and follow podcasts from across the world. Get curated podcasts and playlists every day and listen to what your friends recommend. Share what you love and find what they love. Check us out on storiyvh.com/boom. Download on App Store or Play Store.
Welcome to Audiogyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers, and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host, Kedar Nimkar.
Today I have Jay Dutta with us on Audiogyan, also known as JD. He's a design thinker, doer, evangelist, and a speaker. An alumni of National Institute of Design, Jay has an MSc in Design Management from UK, has been a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, London. Jay built the UX design practices for Adobe India grounds up and has led the UX at Flipkart and has been one of the few designers in the VC world at SAIF Partners. Currently, JD leads the Experience Design Charter for the new expanded MakeMyTrip Group and mentor startups. He's the AsiaPacific Lead for the non-profit IxDa and the founder Curator of DesignUp Conference. Thank you, JD, for giving us your time, and it's a real pleasure to have you on Audiogyan.
Thank you, Kedar. Thank you for having me on Audiogyan. I think it's great because a lot of people whose work I really admire and respect have been here. Mm-hmm. So thanks for the privilege of having me on Audiogyan.
Oh, no, it's all my pleasure. Today's discussion, I have kept the topic around role of design and startups. There are a few questions which I've come up with, and obviously would like to get to know more insights from your side.
Sure.
I would like to start with saying that what is your take on, if we can set the context by state of Indian online products with respect to the products around the world, especially in the design context. I mean, where do you think we stand? What are the shortfalls, or what are the advantages which we have with the products which are already built, like Ola, ClearTrip, MakeMyTrip, and other places?
Sure. I think that's great. I think it's a good one to set the context as well. Broadly, let me just start by saying what my understanding of design is today. And I think the reason I say that is my understanding of design has changed quite significantly, maybe since I was a young grad student to being in the profession in the early years to now. Mm-hmm. I think increasingly those days, I think we were probably hyperventilating about beauty and about, accuracy of stuff and pixel perfection and order and all of that. Increasingly, they do matter, but I think of them more as byproducts as opposed to being the real purpose of it. Okay. I think design increasingly for me is about intent, about purpose. Why does it exist? Why should a product really exist? What needs does it solve? Relevance. I think usability was one big term. I'm sure you've kind of been through that phase at some point.
Correct.
I think there were a lot of usability architects and usability specialists and all of that. The more I look back, I feel usefulness trumps usability any day. Mm-hmm. So if you had something which was slightly unusable, or I think it's just that, if it's like highly useful and it's unusable, you'll still find a way of getting it done. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying it's not important, it's important. So, okay, just to put it in context, for me, I think design is all about context, purpose, usefulness, relevance. And of course, if there's beauty and order and all of that, then that's great. That's probably an add-on. So on that context, if I take some of what is happening in the Indian product design scene, I think probably in the early phases, I think it was about the beauty phase of making things look good, be good, correct, perform well, all that kind of thing was there.
Yeah, more on the aesthetics part.
More on the aesthetic, absolutely. I think there's a lot of on the aesthetics part. And I think the relevance part, we kind of assume that if it works in the US or if it works in a developed market, it should work here. So what is the equivalent of an Amazon in India? What's the equivalent of an Uber in India? What's an equivalent of so on and so forth kind of thing. And I think that is changing. I mean, I'm very glad it's changing. And being with SAIF partners, seeing so many ideas come to us, I think you realize that ideas actually are cheaper than dime a dozen. I think dime a dozen is also pretty expensive. So I think in this sense, a lot of ideas are Me Too ideas. They are again trying to be an X of Y kind of scenario.
Correct.
And to me, that is actually probably the start of a bad design phase or a design journey. We can make it look nice, make it look polished, good UI, all of it. But when the relevance, when the soul is not there, why does it exist? What purpose will it solve?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that probably is the missing link. And today's designers, I think there are some very bright kids I see always. Like probably we were, I'm not bright, but we were kids at some point and kind of talking about like making it look really nice and shiny. And, you design for your peers and you design for your other designer friends, and you say, look at my app, it's like the glossiest, nicest app kind of thing.
Correct.
But I think it's again going back to the context and the relevance. You also said what is broken, what is thing, and I think there are a bunch of it. Maybe our education system itself is broken, but that's what is producing people who are not indexing on originality. We are looking for the right answer, and the right answer, someone else has solved it, so we take the right answer and copy it out.
Correct.
So I think maybe that's probably where the problem starts with. And also, I guess VCs and all probably fuel that up, saying, hey, will it scale fast? Is there a model that can scale fast, etc., etc.? So I think, but having said that, there's a lot of hope. I see a lot of unique apps coming in which are addressing the Indian context, looking beyond the 2%, 5% users in the sort of urban markets who've got a lot more disposable income. So there are a lot more apps who are looking beyond those, and there are some smaller ones. There are small ones like Dunzo, for example, which comes to mind, which I really like. I think that's probably solving a problem, and solving a problem kind of well. I think still in the urban sector, still in very, very for a niche audience.
Correct.
That's fine, but I think we'll get there kind of. There are a bunch of other apps which people have been trying. So I think there is hope, and I think we are increasingly realizing that Me Too is not a good idea. I think it's enough context.
If I may interrupt, why
sure.
do you think this Me Too attitude or this entire character of being Me Too emerged in the last few years? I mean, it is changing now, but how did it? Any insights into that? How did it pick up?
I think part of it is probably our Western education models. That's probably one of the start of it. The fact that we are very Anglo-centric, kind of everything is, I mean, the people who are going to build and the people who are going to create are very, or maybe are educated in the West. The people who are going to fund possibly have seen Western models. So I think it's a very small, siloed model that I begin to see. Everyone kind of understands and knows a very tiny slice of reality, and for them this is the most awesome thing.
Correct.
Twitter did it, Uber did it, Airbnb did it, so we can do it. We can pretty much copy and paste. The Chinese, on the other hand, probably they also have their own share of Western educated, intelligent builders and funders and so on, but I think part of it also is that a lot of majority of Chinese may not be so fluent in English. The whole notion of the language, I think that's the other beauty of it. That creates something which is very unique. So some of their apps may be chaotic, but chaotic is not necessarily by design. I think that's where probably other parts of it comes in actually.
Correct.
So when I look at that, and I think there's been a recent report which everyone alludes to, that amongst the top 50 most valued companies, a huge majority are Chinese actually, the billion-dollar unicorns kind of thing. And part of it is that they have been uniquely themselves. They have not tried to copy anyone. They have tried to be original, not for the sake of originality, but just to be them.
Understanding their own culture and catering to that kind of audience and making it localized, maybe that is one of the reasons.
That's right.
So
people like ShareChat, for example, then there's other tons of people who are now getting into vernacular, understanding our thing. I think they're at an interesting juncture. They're not yet there, but I think they're understanding that there is a huge market out here, kind of.
Correct. Even in the podcast industry, we have like once in a while, like meetups to discuss what's happening. And a lot of people have this say that let's have podcasts in multiple languages so it gets more regional and then much more contextual to a wide variety of Indian audience.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great, actually. That'll be perfect.
Yeah. Cool. So you've worked with as in the VC world as well, and multiple places like Flipkart and MakeMyTrip now. So how critical is it for a company to be like design sensitive, and what are your thoughts on that? Why they should be like that?
So I think it's not at all critical for a company to be design sensitive at all, kind of thing. Provided you're not working with humans, that is. If you're working with humans, you better be sensitive to design, because I think design, again, going back to my earlier sort of definition, is all about purpose and usefulness and all of that. And if you want to be relevant, if you want to make sure that your users are coming back to you, getting what they want, then you better be design sensitive. And by that, I don't mean necessarily that you have to be a beautiful app, or you need to be like a super shiny app which is designed in California and shipped here. But you can be much more sensitive to your users' needs, and that probably by definition is a well-designed product, a well-thought-out product kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's very, very relevant to be design conscious, design centric, and design away from that beautiful pixels kind of a definition overall. You asked me earlier about the startups, and I think one of the things which I used to sort of go and talk to people, and people would tell me that, I think we need good design, we need some visual help and polish it up and nice shiny buttons and all of that. But if your product thought or product, the way it's put together by itself is not right, then no amount of shiny buttons will help you. I think that's probably what people or founders don't get often. But it's changing. I think people are realizing that there is much more to design than the skin deep. I mean, it's much more skin deep than rather than just the skinning surface of it overall kind of thing.
Correct. So I guess I'm assuming this is what I've realized in my own journey as well as a designer, that it just like whatever is perceived as design in the current time, or at least some years back, is like the superficial layer of design. But actually design is much more deeper in the sense that how are things working in the back end, how are things efficiently modeled at an architecture level. So all that also encompasses design. Right? So if we consider that as a premise, like what would be your take on the percentage of new startups or new companies or founders who value design? How do they look at these two things? I mean, architecting and modeling a particular product as opposed to the superficial layer, which just is an interface for the user. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think that's again a very valid kind of thought there, in terms of that is changing, and I see, and that's a great sign. Typically, formerly founders would just talk about the visual design part of it, but increasingly someone says, hey, I need a designer who can. So actually I recently just had a talk with a founder, and the CEO founder kind of told me, listen, we had a designer and he just wasn't thinking pixels and beauty kind of thing, but he was actually talking to people on the ground. He was talking to the suppliers, he was talking to all of them, and he was looking at how are these guys getting integrated in the system, because that in turn sort of really models my tab structure. It really models my menu items kind of. So I think if you work backwards, there's a whole lot of combination which is not apparent. And recently this guy had to move because of family reasons, but this guy just wants a replacement absolutely like him. Someone who thinks design with a big D.
Yeah, interesting. Like, what is your process of getting like approvals on design decisions? Again, in this case, I would like to just strictly keep it in the UI UX domain. I mean, how do you bring everyone on the same page? Because you have worked with like bigger organizations. So how do you pursue others about the thought process which you envision, and then the overall, say, interface which you have designed, or which you're part of designing, how do you bring that into like on the same page, everyone on the same page?
Yeah, I think
This is like a personal question because I have just started as being the head of design and mentoring teams and other designers as well. So this is like a personal question as well.
Right. I think I can share a lot of my failures actually. So I think I failed a lot and realized what works. What really works is to understand the culture of the organization and then fine tune your approach according to that.
Okay.
One of my biggest failures was probably Flipkart. I was there as a head of design for a relatively brief period. And I wanted to go in on day one and change everything because I've had a number of chats with the founders, with the senior folks out there. And I had a vision of how I want this to be. And so I went and I did a whole bunch of things, and we actually kind of created quite a interesting interface, an interesting paradigm, not just an interface, but just a paradigm for the interface and how it should look, a kind of a future vision of how Flipkart should be. So if I think about the version where it was at, let's say it's 10, we were thinking about version 12 or 13 or 14. Right, I think it was an interesting one. What I failed to read was that the organization was too much in a flux. People liked what they saw, people were kind of gearing up for it, but the person who signed it off might not be there the next day. And I think the question was that how do you actually sell it deeper, which is again going back to your own question. How do you actually hold the integrity of vision in such a fluid flux state?
Correct.
I'm glad that some of that finally came out kind of, and not to that extent that we had thought about, because I was kind of reimagining the search and a whole bunch of things. Some of it is there, some of it is not there. There was also things around PWA, for instance, which I did get started off, but kind of, so it was completed later on.
Correct.
And I'm glad that things got done the way they've got done. But yeah, it was probably a lot of learning for me. And the biggest learning was this: adapt to the culture of the organization. Know it. Don't be in a rush. Don't be in a hurry to do anything. So that's probably the two things. The two things which have worked for me at one end as Adobe, and Adobe actually had something called a red box system of innovation. And they kind of formalized it, and it's actually won some awards as one of the biggest inner sort of innovation schemes inside corporations. The idea is that they would actually give you a kind of a design thinking kit with a credit card which had like a $500 loaded on it.
Okay.
I need to qualify for that. You just didn't get it like that. And you would be allowed to run an experiment, ask no one, and use that $500 to run a bunch of experiments.
Oh, nice.
And by that experiments, I would say, so I did quite a few, and we had, the team had great fun. We actually put up a website and said, this is the product, never said it's anything to do with Adobe, and saw how people reacted. And one idea went very, very far. It was taken up by people like Debbie Millman. I met her, and she was like so chuffed. And then I said, well, actually, I'm from Adobe, by the way, kind of. And she said, oh, well, this idea kind of makes sense for Adobe to sort of. At one point, Coca-Cola kind of thought that we were an unknown company, and they said, well, what if we give $1 million check, and can you just implement this for us? The idea was that these were like a whole bunch of sort of service workers of sorts, which would automate a few processes with the Adobe tools. And this essentially was an internal idea, but it was pitched as if it is not, just to see is the market kind of ready for it.
Correct.
But then large companies takes a long time, and you need to have the patience, and and that kind of manifested itself somewhere in libraries and other things. But when I think about my current job at MakeMyTrip, I think what I did was to take all those learnings, all those failures, all those small successes, and said, hey, what do I do? First, understand the culture, and then kind of pitch something. And I'm glad it's working, because we did this huge effort called Cosmos. It's still not done. And it's still a work in progress, but it's a complete design library. It's also got a whole philosophy around it. Managed to sell it to the top bosses, because what we did was to create a vision which is very compelling. And it's almost like when you see that, then you go back to your current app and you say, no, that doesn't quite make sense. Kind of. It's like you had a budget of 15 lakh for an apartment, and you see a 60 lakh apartment, it blows your mind, and you say, Now you can't go back to your 15 lakhs.
Correct.
You probably will go at least like 30 lakhs kind of
Yeah.
thing. You'll double your budget for that. So I think that's probably the psychology of doing it. Make it so compelling, so attractive. Put in the data in there. It has to be visual, emotive, data, purpose, everything baked together.
Packaged
And
together.
don't be in a hurry. That's the other part.
Yeah. Don't be in a hurry is a very important point.
Yeah, I think that's one of the greatest lessons that I had from Flipkart. I was too much in a hurry.
Interesting. In one of your interviews, you mentioned that don't design for the next billion. Design around the one and how you can make contextual to each individual and treat them as a mass. Can you tell us like what made you say that, and if you have any particular case study which you can briefly tell us about that this particular philosophy helped you in like promoting good product or bringing a good product to the market?
Okay, so I think partly I alluded to it. In Flipkart, I think we were always talking about the next 100 million, next billion. And I think that's the same thing which Google and many, many other companies do. They look at India's masses and they look at hundreds of millions of people with phones, now with geo data and so much free data around.
Correct.
And they say, oh, wow, look at that. That's my target market. That's like 100 million customers, a billion customer waiting for me. But in that some ways, it's kind of also desensitizing the whole thing. These are individuals. They are not a target market kind of, right? And that's what I increasingly in Flipkart, I kept thinking about that these are human beings. They have the life, they have the unique sort of, you could aggregate in some way saying, okay, they all live in Dharavi, but still they are very different. Someone
Correct.
maybe have a son who's doing really well, someone maybe has a disabled mother and so on. So I think each individual life is so unique. And the other point which kept coming to me was that phones with their thousands of data points can actually build a portrait of this uniqueness or individuality, which is we are not tapping into. We're just saying, okay, here's the sort of thing, and I'll broadcast. I think it's a one-way street. I'll broadcast, you will receive.
Correct.
As opposed to being a two-way communication,
More
almost like the
interactive,
conversation we are having today, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it was just like, I'll tell you and you will receive me kind of thing, and you will just go out and purchase more things, which is probably the wrong notion kind of thing. Or I'll take your data and I'll send you what to purchase kind of thing. When I came to MakeMyTrip, and we have both been in travel domain, so we know, if you had a largish travel purchase, I think Google or I can't remember, one of these companies released a large report last year, which talked about that if you were to like think about a holiday, and this was for India especially, or a largish travel kind of spend, people go to an average of about 47 different sites. They take about 39 days.
Okay.
They go to like apps and websites and back and forth. And so I think what's happening is that you're going back and forth. Suddenly we're going to TripAdvisor, ClearTrip, MakeMyTrip, Kayak, you name it. You're going back and forth. And somewhere in each site, I think it starts by asking you, where do you want to go? Who do you want to go with? When, why, what? Like there are 20 other questions that it needs to ask you.
Correct.
And this is the same thing with there is Kayak, ClearTrip, MakeMyTrip. And it just struck me, we are called MakeMyTrip, but there's nothing my about it. There's nothing personal about it. And when I combined that old philosophy of designing for one, I said, hey, we have a lot of data points. We can actually do that. So once you search, your context is preserved with us. I can tell you a whole bunch of things. So maybe the flight you search for got cheaper. Maybe the holiday that we're planning to go is going to increase in price. I can predict a lot of things. You bought a flight from me, but you did not buy a hotel. So you're sitting in the airport, and I know you're in the airport. Do you want to sort of take that thing? Maybe there's leftover inventory which you can actually take off at last minute deals. So you could actually get a Taj at some ridiculous price kind of thing.
Correct.
Now, those are things where I begin to understand you as a user, and I show you things which are relevant as opposed to notification. I mean, there's still a lot of notification around, but I think that's the whole idea of, can I be more relevant, and how much relevant can I be? And we are in the age of like AI and NLP and machine learning and all these fancy terms, cognitive computing and all of that. But if we can't solve these basic human things around making it 100% relevant for you, then what's the use?
Correct.
So the new Cosmos philosophy, I talked about Cosmos earlier, is around putting the my back in MakeMyTrip. That's the bottom line kind of thing. So it's how do I put the my? It's to make it completely relevant. So almost like you will come at a point where what each one sees, it's already happening. The app that you see is different from the app I see. It's going to be different from the app someone else sees. But I think it's going to go more and more. Maybe it's going to be very, very different based on where you are, what phone you use. I think we are on that path to making it very personal, very much you.
Correct. Interesting, because I did an interview with Gaur Ray sir from IDC, and we spoke about ergonomics in the furniture space and in the physical product space. And I'm just trying to connect the dot here that obviously there are no solutions. There are obviously trade-offs. But in this case, where you well put that there's nothing about it right now. So it's mainly at a very abstract level trying to bring in ergonomics at an interface level itself, because this is what you're doing, right? Like knowing the context completely and then building it according to that, making it much more personal.
Totally.
So, yeah. Interesting.
So it's almost like thinking, I very often speak to the security guards and all of that. And I think for them, there's a security guard from Orissa. For him, there is a cadence. Twice a year, he'll go back home. He is not a leisure traveler. He is like an economic migrant who needs to go back home and visit his family, his son studying in standard 10th and so on. You listen to their stories and then you say, okay, what does the app look like for him? Because he needs to sort of find out maybe in advance the train timings and a whole bunch of other things. So I think
but then again, what you're doing is you're always targeting a particular segment, right? Not a particular user, because then it becomes very difficult to customize the product at that level. Or is it possible?
Yeah, actually, that's a good one, because so I think you start with the segment, but you can slowly get into a user. So, for example, there are some users who will maybe book 10 hotels on Booking.com and they will cancel 9. Now, I know this is a pattern, and I can figure out that this person has this pattern. He takes some exotic vacation, books 10 hotels, cancels 9, stays with 1. Now, what is the offering for him? So can I customize it? And at some point of time, I think it's not you anymore. You set a set of rules, and that rule is customized for a person who does this kind of behavior versus some other kind of behavior. But I think if you had 1 million rules, that's also possible. So I think that's the beauty of a computing system, is that you could actually create 1 million rules and you could actually figure out an algorithm to serve each one very individually.
Brilliant.
So I think that's where I think my other thing is. And of course, you need an interface to sort of make sure that the person is getting all of that.
Correct.
But that's probably the second part of it. If you can solve this problem, then you can solve that problem too.
Interesting. I think... these were the few questions. Obviously, there are tons of things to be spoken about in the design world, and let's see how we can schedule another Audiogyan session maybe with another set of things. But I would like to conclude with one last question, which I'll have a follow-up Audiogyan session with you, especially on DesignUp. You have started this DesignUp. Can you just briefly tell us about what it is?
So DesignUp is essentially a conference. I call it a conference, a cause, and a community. I think, of course, it started with the idea of partly going back to the beginning of the conversation where you kind of asked, like, how do startups react and things like that. While being at the VC, I kind of realized that the meaning of design is so divergent. I mean, not that everyone needs to have a same common definition, but at least we have to have a few basic constructs of what design can mean.
Correct.
And one was that,
or at least know what it doesn't mean.
Doesn't mean exactly, yeah. So it doesn't mean fashion design. So it's something like that kind of. Like when I was kind of growing up, or when I went to design school, everyone would say, "Oh, designer, so you must be a fashion designer," kind of. So there was like a very stereotyping done. I think the idea was to at least break those stereotypes and say that there are 5 kinds of designers or 20 kinds of designer, and design can do this also and that also. So in some ways was to expand that, and in some ways was to contract some of those misconceptions and say not that kind of thing. So I think that's how it started. But there were other factors, and maybe when you do the follow-up, I can talk more about that. But there were other reasons as well for starting DesignUp. And the thing was that before I went into the VC world, between Flipkart and the VC world, I was doing a startup of my own. And that startup was called attend.com. So I'm a conference junkie, you can say. I've spoken at many conferences. I've attended many conferences. And at some point of time, I was doing this app in the conference domain kind of thing. And that's how I met SAIF, and somehow that became a full-time engagement slowly.
Okay.
But this was in the back of my mind that we could do something. And suddenly we said one fine day, let's do that kind of. So I got along a few people, and yeah, we started DesignUp.
Okay.
The first one, 2016, was I think almost the same time that you were starting Audiogyan. November 2016, it was a small one, 230 people in actually startup space, which is actually Naresh Narasimhan's space.
Okay.
And by Numa. Numa has that French accelerator who does that. So we did that, and I think it was a good one. Typically, we really enjoyed. People had good fun. We learned a lot. It was very, very tightly curated. So you had all aspects of design in startups. That was how it started, kind of thing. But we said, let's expand it more. And that's how it pretty much went. So yeah, that's probably the start of DesignUp.
Yeah, sure. All right. This is a good note to end this. I'll tell our listeners to wait for the next follow-up episode, which is purely focusing on DesignUp, and know more about the conference and what's in store in 2018 October. Thank you. Thank you for giving us your time, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Same, it was a pleasure talking to you, and it was really good sort of being here again.
Yeah.
In the sense of like being after a bunch of people who, again, as I said, respect the work, love what they've been doing. So great to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Saavn, Stitcher, or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on Audiogyan.com. Till then, bye.
If you don't think you can afford health insurance, think again. Now more than ever, New Jersey is committed to making sure everyone has access to affordable health care and understands their options. Health plan rates are down nearly 10% this year, and we could help you find a plan that's right for you. You may even be eligible for financial assistance to help pay for your plan. But remember, open enrollment ends December 15th. Visit getcovered.nj.gov to get started today.